I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids or Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids or Childfree podcast. Today, we are doing a solo episode, and we're going to be talking about regret and this big question that I get from, I would say, almost all of you, which is, what if I regret my decision someday? And there's a lot we can say about the topic of regret. This would probably warrant several podcast episodes. But I want to approach this topic basically by reiterating a question that I recently got on one of our Kids or Child-Free workshops. And the way that this attendee framed or sort of phrased this question, I just thought was so on point and speaks to a bigger question that I get from a lot of people a lot of the time, which is effectively like, how do I trust that my future self will want the things that I feel like I want today? I.e., if I'm making this decision in present time, which is, of course, the only place we can make this decision, how do I know that future me is going to be happy with that choice? Oof. Okay. Great question. And I'm going to, again, just sort of articulate what she shared with me, which is she said, if you ask me right now if I want kids, I have a very clear answer. And the answer is no, I don't want kids. She said, I know myself well now, and I know how I want my life to look. But what if what I want in the future changes? She added that people constantly evolve and change, which of course is true. And she does feel fearful that she may regret her decision someday if future her feels differently than present day her, who it's clear she doesn't want to have kids. Now, I appreciate the framing of this question. It may be a little bit different than what some of you are grappling with in the fact that you maybe aren't clear whether or not you want kids. But I think the point stands that we worry about making the decision today because we don't know how us in the future is going to feel about that choice. And again, such a good question. So let's get into it. I'm going to share some of the things that I shared with her in the workshop, as well as a few additional thoughts, because I have a lot more time in this podcast episode than I did in the 2-hour Kids or Child-Free workshop. Okay, so the very first thing I think is important for us to ask is, who are we making this kids or child-free decision for? Now, I hope the answer that comes to mind is me. I'm making this decision for me, or perhaps in part for that future child that I would or wouldn't have. We have all kinds of pressures from other people, right? Are we making this decision for our parents because they want to have grandkids? Are we making this decision for our friend group so that they have a, fellow child-free peer or person who also has kids? Hopefully not. I understand that these pressures can be very real, but hopefully we are making this first and foremost for ourselves. And again, that can, and I would encourage you to say it should include how we feel like our child would fare with us as their parent. But when it comes to making this decision for us, we need to delve a little bit deeper and think about, are we making this decision for us today, or are we making it for our future self? And I don't expect that you're going to have a definitive, clear answer to this question, but I do think it warrants thinking about, because the way I see a lot of people approaching this decision, and I think part of the reason they get stuck with the kids or child-free choice, is they are solely trying to make this for their 60, 70, 80-year-old self. And in many ways, there's no way of knowing what that future person may want. Not entirely true, by the way. I'm going to contradict myself in just a minute. But again, we're not our 70-year-old selves. We're our 35-year-old or 40-year-old or however old you are today self. So the other person we can make this decision for would be current you, the person you are today, the person who wants to have certain kinds of experiences where you have certain kinds of values, what's important to you, et cetera. And realistically, the answer is probably somewhere between those two things. Because here's where I take issue with the idea that we are only making this choice for our future self. And again, I'm not saying this is a bad approach. I've certainly heard many people say, I pictured myself at, call it 60, 70, 80 years of age. I thought, what would that person want? That person will have wanted to have kids. Great, there's my decision. I think the problem with this approach is that we need to also make sure that the person who is 30, 40, 50 something wants the experience of having and raising kids. Because if you're solely making this decision for that future person, that potential payoff, first of all, we're making the assumption that we're going to live to a certain age, which I hope you and we do, but we don't know. The future is, of course, not guaranteed. We're also making assumptions about that experience of having a child being a certain way, again, especially at that future point in time. We usually have this very beautiful sort of idyllic view that we've got a great relationship with our kid, maybe that our kid or kids are in close proximity to us, that we have a certain kind of relationship. And making the decision solely on the basis of those things, in my view, neglects all of the day-to-day of what it will take to foster that kind of relationship, which may, for various reasons, still not come to pass. I really like this notion. It's something that some of our past guests have talked about, but like, do you want the experience of having and raising a child? Or conversely, would you prefer to continue living the experience or experiences of being a child-free person? Now, realistically speaking, your approach in terms of who this decision is for, your future self, i.e., 70, 80, 90-year-old you, what have you, or current you today. And I don't just mean in like this moment in time today, sitting here at 2:30 p.m. recording this, feeling hungry. Maybe I don't want to have a kid around because that would not work out well with my plans of recording a podcast and making myself some lunch. But I of course, am talking about like you over the foreseeable and where you're at sort of at this stage of life. Thinking about those two things, that the present you, the future you, again, I think we need to learn to cultivate discernment to not just necessarily make a decision based on this singular moment or period of time, but also not just for the future. I realize the nuance, let's say, that I'm bringing to this sort of idea of like, who are we making the decision for, may feel complicated to you. But I mostly just want to plant a seed for you to think about, like, who is this decision for? And by the way, that's not up to me to decide. Many people make this decision solely for a present self or solely for a future self. Again, for me, it's probably a mix of the two, but the information that I have is about this present life that I'm living, the kind of person I am. Of course, I've also taken the past into account as a part of that. Okay, now, as much as I say, yeah, you don't really know entirely how my life might look in the future, what you might want, et cetera, and that's one reason we might not want to make a decision solely from that point of view. I think there is a real tendency to think about all the ways in which we might change. We have this idea that perhaps we're going to have like a total 180 in terms of our personality or temperaments, what's important to us in life. And yeah, of course, people do evolve and change. And to a degree, what's important to us today may not be what's important in the future, just like what was important to us when we were, let's say, 22 years of age may not be important to us today. But rather than thinking about all the ways in which you anticipate you might change or that life has changed already, I think it's important, and especially if you're struggling with this fear, like the attendee at the workshop was struggling with, if you're struggling with the fear that like, oh my gosh, what if I change my mind? What if future me wants something else? It can be helpful to identify and sort of look at what the through line has been in your life. So as an example, a lot has outwardly changed in my life in the last 10 years. I'm living in a different country. I, 10 years ago, had a day job working in advertising sales. I was also running a product-based business doing jewelry design. In the interim, I've had different iterations of the businesses that am running. I no longer work for someone else. I live in an entirely different country and continent, having moved from Vancouver, Canada to Munich, Germany. I'm now married today. My father passed away coming up close to 6 years ago. So like we can say a lot of things have changed in my life. That might feel scary in the sense that like, well, if so much changed in 10 years, again, what's life going to look like when I'm 70 years old? But what has stayed the same is I, 10 years ago, loved being outside and moving my body in nature and spending time in the mountains. And I still enjoy doing that and those things. I have always wanted to be my own boss and work for myself and be an entrepreneur. And there's been ups and downs and, of course, moments that I've hated that. But like that has stayed the same. Even when I was in sales, being a salesperson in a, commission compensated environment, that's something that requires a certain degree of risk and ability to withstand discomfort. I've generally been quite extroverted for the extent of my adult life, and I've been fortunate to be someone who's quite good at fostering connections and community wherever I've lived and been. And so these are just a few examples for myself to say, like, look, there is a through line in my life. Connection is important. Community is important. Moving my body is important. Being out in nature is important. Being sort of self-sufficient, independent. And those things are also true of me when I was quite a bit younger than, 33 years, 10 years ago, when I was 23. Now, the way in which I expressed some of those things might have been different. So, for example, if you say, oh, I'm an adventurous person, adventures at age 23 might translate to something else than adventures at age 43. But again, I want you to spend some time thinking about like what has remained true and steady, what things have stayed the same, even if the outward sort of conditions or markers of your life or whatnot have changed. Even if you have, as a person, have evolved and changed, which, listen, I have no doubt that you have. Like, I'm 100% sure you have. I've changed a lot in the last 10 years. For me, saying if these things have been constant, in all likelihood, I'm going to continue to be a person who, both values connection and community, but also loves having a degree of independence in my life. I'm somebody who will continue to value our natural world and moving my body, even though that may change based on, physical limitations that I have or how that might shift as I age. So when we can start to like have a little bit of confidence in the sameness of our life, that can help us recognize that like, okay, yeah, maybe will I change my mind? Call it in 30, 40, 50 years, perhaps. But also all these things will likely have stayed to some degree the same. So that can help create some confidence that I am in fact making a confident, intentional choice today. Another thing we need to do when we think about the future, and again, going back to this question of like, okay, I don't want to have kids today, but what if that changes in 30, 40 years? And P.S., everything I'm sharing, the inverse can be true. So you can say, today I know I want to have kids, but what if in 10 years I think, gosh, I'm not suited for this role as mom or dad, or, I would have preferred to have done something else with my time and energy, etc. I have some exciting news to share with you today, and that is I have just announced a brand new 6-month Kids or Child-Free support series. If you are new here, you've not already attended one or more of these fantastic sessions, the support series is a 6-month series of events. We have one event per month, and they all tackle a different topic of the kids or child-free decision, where you are either stuck or an area where you could use some enlightenment to help you make this kids or child-free choice. The upcoming schedule has some really fun new events. For example, in March, I'm going to be hosting a session that's called Pet Reflections, and it sort of addresses this idea of like, is having a pet or having a dog or cat kind of like having a kid? Well, maybe not quite, but I would say there are actually some interesting things that we can learn from our pets and our relationship with our pets as we consider this kids or child-free choice. So that's what we're going to be delving into in this March event. Coming up even sooner for our very first event on February 24th, we're going to be talking about culture and your choice and how different aspects of culture, whether that's the culture you've been brought up in, whether that's the religion or faith that you follow, whether that is just the broader culture of patriarchy and pronatalism, we're going to be looking at how these things sort of are interplaying with your decision to help you get more clarity on how you feel and how you can navigate it in spite of, or maybe because of these influences. It's okay for our decision to be shaped by the forces around us, but I think that it's also really important that we're questioning them and making sure that it aligns with our own true feelings about this choice. So that's just a little teaser of our next couple of months of events. We have 4 more events to round out those 6 months. This is going to be running again from February 24th through July. You can get a ticket for each event, a la carte, if you will. It's $59. That's tax inclusive. You can get an all-access pass, which is going to allow you to attend all 6 events for $236, which is a savings of $118. And that all-access pass is not going to be available for the entirety of the series, but you'll need to get it right now up front to be able to attend all 6 of those events. And if for some reason you can't attend one or more of the sessions live, they will be recorded, but you do need to have a ticket for the event before the event happens. So again, Kids or Child-Free Support Series. I will include the details in the show notes of today's episode. You can also find that at kidsorchildfree.com under the Work With Me tab. And I look forward to seeing you at one or more of the upcoming events. Regardless of how we're thinking about this, we need to cultivate trust in ourselves, self-trust. This is a big part of the Kids or Child-Free decision. And that is developing a sort of sense of like, I'm going to be okay. It doesn't mean I'm going to like everything about my decision. It doesn't mean there won't be challenges in the future. It doesn't mean there may even be moments of regret or wistfulness or thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? It doesn't mean that it won't be hard. I mean, many of those things are guarantees because it's life. And so I'm not saying we need to trust that the future is going to be perfect and we're going to love every second of it. But what we need to remember is that stuff has happened to us, right? That we have experienced things. We have probably instigated some of these things that sucked. And you have also gotten through it. Probably messily, imperfectly. I'm not saying that you've liked the hardships you've endured in your life, whether that has been loss, whether that has been great change, whether that has been, what any kind of upheaval, mental, emotional, physical illnesses, it doesn't matter. But you have gotten through things. If you're sitting here, standing here, driving, whatever you're doing, listening to this today, the stuff that's happened in your life, you've gotten through with a success rate of 100%, however messy that journey may have been. And so we need to then turn to the future and say, okay, I've gotten through stuff. I have the resilience. I have the fortitude. I have the strength. I have the ability. And I know that because of the things that have already happened in my life to get through whatever happens in the future. Nobody likes uncertainty. Nobody likes things feeling outside of their control. Nobody likes knowing that we may not like and love every single aspect of whatever kids or child free choice we ultimately make. But we need to learn to sort of trust ourselves and say I'll figure it out. I was going to say, I'll be okay. It may not always feel like you're going to be okay, but I'll figure things out. And so to sort of move along to my next point, okay, let's just say then what if you do wake up in 10 years or 30 years or 40 years for that matter and say, wow, what kind of decision have I made? Let's say you're like our workshop attendee who says, oh my goodness, I didn't want kids and now I've woken up and thought, suddenly I do. That does not mean that your hands are tied and there are no choices that you can make. You may very well be in a position where kids are no longer on the table or where you've had a child or children and you're probably not going to give them away. But there are other aspects of your life that you can change. We have to remember that parenthood and child-free living are not singular paths. They don't only look one way. It's not like everything is prescribed to such a T that there's no movement or ability to change. So if you wake up in the future and you think, oh my gosh, what's important to me now is no longer what wasn't important to me then, or I didn't take this into account, or I should have maybe made the sense of I should have made a different choice. Of course, we have no way of knowing if we should have made a different choice, but then we can kind of correct course. We can do things to say, okay, maybe I feel like I'm lacking connection with young people in my life as a child-free person. I'm missing that experience that I see my friends having children and grandchildren. We can cultivate relationships with young people. We can invest more in the relationships that we already have. We can become part of new communities. We can become a mentor. We can be a carer. It's not okay, well, then the options in my life for doing that are totally up and out. There's nothing else. Likewise, if we wake up with a child and think, my gosh, I feel like in many ways the person I was is a person who's been lost to me. I no longer have my own sense of self or identity outside my kids. I know this is a big fear I hear specifically from a lot of you women. It's not okay, that's just your lot in life. Everything sucks. There's a chance for you to double down and find opportunities to cultivate and reconnect with the person that you were, the person that you are. So the idea that we suddenly have either a sense or feelings of regret or what if, or I should have done things differently, there are ways that we can move through that. And in the instances that there aren't, and it's this sense of, let's say, oh, wow, I realize not having had my own young infant and having had that experience of having birthed something or had my own baby, that brings about, let's say, a wistful or sad feeling at a certain point in the future in my life. It's also okay for me to experience that sadness. It's okay for that not always to feel great. It doesn't mean I've made the wrong decision. It just means that I'm sort of having to experience the quote unquote emotional fallout of my choice. And again, that's going to be the case no matter what we choose. It's not going to feel good all the time. The other thing I think we have to remember is we get to the future day by day. So this whole idea of we're suddenly leaping forward decades and we're thinking, holy shit, what have I done? Maybe that'll happen. I'm going to suggest that probably not. And here's the reason why probably not. You are someone who is being so intentional and deliberate with this choice. And while you cannot consider and think about every last possible thing that may come to pass, you're not going in with your eyes closed. You're going in with your eyes open with a conscious thought of like, okay, what do I want? What's important to me? Is this an experience I want to have, whether having kids or being child free? And so as such, I would say I would argue like a lot less likelihood that this sudden, oh my gosh, what have I done is going to happen because you're being conscious and intentional with this choice. The other thing is because we get to the future day by day, like we don't wake up overnight and all of a sudden 40 years have passed. I know it feels that way, right? Time goes quickly, but we get there day by day. And through the day by day, through the present that will take us to the future, the day by day of our life, there is that opportunity to correct course along the way. Just like I talked about that if you wake up in a decade or 4 decades and realize that something in your life has been missing or you want something to change, that there still is some ample opportunity to make those changes. So the day by day, we can correct course. If you're thinking, gosh, I really feel like, I'm lacking connection in my life, you can go out and cultivate new connections. If you're thinking, I'm really lonely having not had kids or having had kids and now my kids have moved away and I've invested solely in those children and wow, the rest of my community's fallen away, right? Whatever has happened, you can make those connections. Loneliness, as uncomfortable and terrible as that may feel, does not need to be the story for the rest of your life. The last thing I want to say is that if you enjoy your life today, if life feels good, if you enjoy maybe not everything, but let's say perhaps you enjoy the work that you do, or you've got great friendships and community or family, or you find a lot of meaning in your relationship with your partner, or you love your hobbies and pastimes, you enjoy the travel you do, whatever it is. If you enjoy your life today, it tells me you have the capacity to redirect your energies and design a life in the future that also feels good, right? Or that also brings you joy. And so I realize this is not the position that all of you are in, right? You might be listening thinking, but I don't enjoy my life today. My life sucks. To which I say, well, obviously I'm sorry to hear that. And let's start first and foremost thinking about some changes that you can make to be able to make this kids or child-free decision from a better place and having a better foundation for this choice. But again, if we go to our question asker at the workshop who says, I know what I want today. I feel good about my life today. Present me does not want to have a kid. That person is telling me like, yes, probably partly due to privilege and circumstance, they have a life that feels good, but also they've probably done a lot of things to cultivate this life that feels like a good fit for them. So there is nothing to suggest that they can't do that again and again and again as time goes on. Okay, I would love your thoughts on this solo episode we just did today. That was fun. Again, that is an expanded view of something that we talked about in our Kids or Child-Free workshop. And although we, inside the workshop, there's an itinerary, if you will. There are certain things that we talk about each session. I also take a lot of questions. There's a chance for lots of back and forth and discussion around various aspects of this choice. So if you have not already signed up for one of our Kids or Child-Free workshops and you're on the fence about kids, this applies to all genders. Everyone is welcome. Tickets for the workshop are $59. That is tax inclusive. We have just moved to tax inclusive pricing across the board in the business. It's a 2-hour online workshop. If you cannot attend it live, yes, you will get a replay, but you need to purchase a ticket for a given event. We host the workshop 2-3 times a month. And very exciting news. This podcast episode is going to be airing on February 4th. And on February, got to do my math, I believe it's the 12th, I'm going to be in Canada, as opposed to recording this in Germany. And what that means is for the very, very first time, I'm actually going to be hosting the Kids or Child-Free workshop in the evening if you are in North America. This one's probably not going to work for those of you who are in Europe, sadly, unless you want to join me in the wee hours. But I'm going to be doing this workshop on the 12th of February from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time or Pacific Time. I always get them confused. I think, fun fact, sidebar, I just recently learned that Standard Time, Eastern Standard Time, Pacific Standard Time, what have you, only applies when we're either in or out of daylight savings. I forget which it is. In any case, if you're in Vancouver, if you're on the West Coast, if you're LA, etc., it'll be happening from 5 to 7 on the 12th. And if you are on the East Coast or somewhere in between, but East Coast time, so New York, Toronto, etc., that workshop's going to be happening from 8 till 10 p.m. This is exciting because I understand most of you have jobs that you go to during the day, and that our workshops, based on where I am at in the world, often happen during the daytime. So if you've been putting off attending one of these workshops because the timing hasn't worked, very exciting opportunity coming up in just a little over a week. You can get tickets for that in the show notes of today's episode over at kidsorchildfree.com/// again, like basic life things that I don't know. Workshop is the the word you're looking for there. Of course, you can also find that under the Work With Me tab. We also have some events coming up in March. We've got an Australia-friendly time, New Zealand, of course, as well, the Asia-Pacific region. We've also got times that are going to work for those of you in Europe. So again, that's the Kids Are Child-Free workshop. Welcoming your feedback on this episode. As all of our episodes, we will be back next week with another fantastic guest. And until then, I wish you a beautiful rest of your day. Don't go just yet. I have one more thing I want to share with you today, and that is an ask. If you are enjoying the podcast and you have not already left us a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app, you can give us a star rating on the Spotify app. If you listen in the Apple Podcast app, you can leave a rating as well as a review, i.e. share a few kind words about this podcast and how it's impacted you. This goes a really long way in helping our podcast get discovered by other listeners, prospective, or I should say fence sitters who need some help with their decision. It'll just take you a quick moment, and it truly does go a long way. So again, rating, review, make sure as well that you're subscribed to the podcast so you always get future episode updates. And otherwise, I wish you a beautiful rest of your day.